Welcome. Today we're opening up the documentation on a truly chilling series of events from modern Japanese history.
Yes, the 1985 indiscriminate poisonings. They're often referred to as the Paraquat murders.
We've gathered a range of materials, police reports, articles from the time, sociological analyses. Our goal here is to really extract the key insights from these documents.
To understand not just the events, but the mechanics behind them, how this kind of product tampering case was carried out.
And crucially, why it remains unsolved even after all these years.
When you look through the files on this, the sheer scale of it really hits you.
It's not just one or two incidents.
No, not at all. This was a sustained campaign. It went on for over 6 months, targeting people just using public amenities across, large parts of Western and Central Japan.
And what makes it so difficult, I think, is the randomness.
Exactly. The victims were completely random. This wasn't about a grudge against a person or even a specific company.
It was violence for the sake of it, through something as mundane as buying a drink.
The human cost is it's staggering. It really was a national crisis.
The records we have show at least 13 people were killed.
And another 35 became seriously ill.
Some of the analysis we've seen suggests that if you measure it by fatalities from a single product tampering spree,
This could potentially be the deadliest in recorded history.
it's important to frame it with that gravity right from the start.
It's truly devastating.
Yeah.
And the core of the mystery is the method.
Right.
The killer used the everyday infrastructure of life vending machines to place these poison drinks. They were mostly laced with a herbicide, paraquat dichloride.
So the trust you have in a simple, convenient service.
It was completely weaponized.
And despite the spree lasting from the end of April all the way to late November of 1985, the central issue is the culprit was never found.
Never identified. The case is, to this day, completely cold. It's this profound investigative failure set against a backdrop of just chilling anonymity.
The documents really paint a picture of a perpetrator who had an almost perfect grasp of anonymity and, maybe more importantly, of consumer behavior.
This wasn't just a random act of lashing out. It was calculated. It was an exploitation of what people expected.
So before we get into that methodology, we really need to understand the weapon itself.
Yes, the poison, and why it was so incredibly easy to get in Japan at that time.
So let's start with the timeline. When and where did this all begin?
The first documented poisoning, according to the files, was on April 30th, 1985.
Okay, April 30th.
And it was in a city called Fukuyama, in
Yeah.
the Hiroshima prefecture. That was the start of the pattern, though no one recognized it as a pattern at the time.
And that first attack, it sort of set the template for everything that followed, didn't it?
It did perfectly. The victim drank a bottle of Aranamin C,
Which was a very popular vitamin energy drink.
very popular. And the bottle had been left on top of a vending machine, so you immediately have all the key elements there.
A common product, a public location, and this idea of a found or free item. Now, the poison, its effects weren't always immediate, which must have made it harder to connect the dots.
That's a crucial point. In that first case, the victim got sick right away. But he didn't actually die until a month later, on May 30th.
A month?
Yes. This slow onset meant that for some victims, the link between the drink and the illness wasn't obvious to the first doctors or police on the scene.
Which allowed the killer to keep going.
It allowed the crime wave to build momentum before the authorities fully grasped what was happening. The spree eventually continued all the way until November 24th of that year.
Let's talk about the poison itself. Paraquat dichloride. For anyone not familiar with it, what is this substance? What makes it so destructive?
Fundamentally, it's an agricultural chemical, a herbicide. It's used all over the world to control weeds, especially before a harvest.
So a common farming tool.
A staple on farms, yes, for quick, effective weed control. But the danger to humans is it's extreme.
And if someone ingests it, what happens?
It's highly corrosive, extremely toxic, and there's no real antidote. No. Swallowing even a tiny amount, a single sip can, set off a cascade of organ failure. It goes there, the lungs, the kidneys, the liver, causing them to just shut down.
And for those who don't die right away.
The long-term prognosis is devastating. Often it causes irreversible lung fibrosis. Your lungs essentially harden and you suffocate over time. That's why the time of death varied so much. Some died in hours from acute failure, others suffered for weeks.
And I see in the notes here there was one exception. A slightly different chemical was used in one case.
A key detail, yes. While paraquat was the main weapon, at least one poisoning involved a chemical called diquat.
Is that similar?
Very similar. It's a related herbicide with a comparable level of toxicity, though it tends to affect the central nervous system a bit more quickly than the lungs. But the consistency was in the method.
Using an agricultural toxin?
Right. Not necessarily the exact same compound every single time.
Which brings us to the core vulnerability that made this whole spree possible, just how easy it was to get Paraquat in Japan in 1985.
It was a massive regulatory blind spot when you look back at it. At the time of the murders, Paraquat was incredibly easy to obtain.
You didn't need a license or anything.
You didn't need a prescription, and really astonishingly, you didn't need any ID.
So anyone could just walk into a store and buy a highly lethal poison with almost no questions asked.
Pretty much, yes. The rules were based on trust, the assumption of agricultural use. All a buyer had to do was say they needed it for agricultural purposes.
And there was no real verification of that.
No rigorous checks, no central tracking of sales. It was convenient for farmers, but it was a catastrophe waiting to happen. You could find it in agricultural co-ops, hardware stores.
And the danger of this chemical wasn't a secret. The documents showed Japan was already dealing with the consequences of it being so available.
That context is so important. The number of suicides using Paraquat in the year just before this demonstrated how dangerous its accessibility was.
What were the numbers?
In 1984 alone, the year right before the murder spree, the records confirm that 4,402 people in Japan used Paraquat to end their lives.
Over 1,400 people in 1 year. Let's just pause on that. What does that statistic tell us about the situation the killer was walking into?
It tells us two critical things. First, the chemical was not just available, it was widely known by the public as an effective, accessible poison. The killer didn't need to find some exotic substance.
They used something that was already infamous.
Exactly. And second, it shows there was already a major public health crisis around pesticide access that hadn't been properly addressed. The murder spree just took a private tragedy suicide and turned it into a terrifying public threat. The foundation for these attacks was already there.
So easy access to the poison gave them the weapon, but the horrific genius of the perpetrator was their understanding of Japanese consumer culture.
Particularly vending machine culture.
How common were they? Why were they such a perfect vehicle for these crimes?
Vending machines, or jijanbaiki, are just.
Right.
They are a central part of the Japanese landscape. The source material notes there were about 5.2 million of them across the country back then.
They're everywhere.
Everywhere. On street corners, outside shops, deep in residential neighborhoods. They represent convenience and, more importantly, a kind of unspoken trust. You use one, you expect a safe product.
And the killer didn't tamper with the machines themselves, which is interesting. They placed the poisoned items around them.
That was the brilliance of it. They knew that putting a bottle near a machine makes you think it's part of the machine's world, either left behind by someone or, more likely, a promotion.
And they focused on specific drinks.
Mostly energy drinks, yes.
Oh.
Oranamin C and Real Gold. They came in these very distinct, recognizable brown glass bottles. A few victims did die from poisoned Coca-Cola, but the method of placement was always the same.
Let's get deeper into that Oranamin C promotion. This is where the killer's psychological insight is just so chilling. What was the company, Asuka Pharmaceutical, trying to do with that campaign?
Oranamin C was a big success, but by the mid-'80s, its main customers were middle-aged working men, the salarymen. Otsuka wanted to freshen up the brand, bring in younger people. So they used a classic marketing tactic, a buy one, get one free type of incentive.
So customers were primed to expect a free bottle.
Exactly. The company had created a cultural expectation that you might find a free, unsolicited drink at or near the vending machine.
The killer didn't have to do much then.
They didn't have to break into the machine or create fake labels. They just took the normal, recognizable bottles, laced them with Paraquat, and put them in plain sight.
On top of the machine, in the return slot.
Or just sitting on a ledge nearby. To the person who just bought a drink, finding another one felt like a bonus. A bit of good luck. It was a fatal lapse in caution, but a very understandable one.
It's so insidious. It preys on such a basic human reaction, the appeal of a free gift. To really understand the impact, let's look at some of the victims. Their stories really emphasize the indiscriminate cruelty here.
It's vital to remember the individuals. There's the case of Takashi Sakai, a 44-year-old executive. On September 5th, he drank 2 vitamin drinks he found.
2 of them.
2. Which suggests he had no reason to be suspicious. He became gravely ill and fought for his life for 6 weeks before he died.
6 weeks of what must have been agony with his body shutting down.
And then you have cases showing how quickly it could kill.
Right.
A 52-year-old man, Haruo Otsu. On September 11th in Tokyo, he drank one of these free bottles of vitamin C. The records show he was dead just 52 hours later.
Wow.
It just shows that it didn't matter who you were, a businessman, a student. The poison was just unforgiving.
The geographical range is also a key piece of this puzzle. This wasn't just happening in one town.
Not at all. It was a nationwide threat, which made the investigation a nightmare to coordinate. You have cases in Fukuyama where it started, but also in Tokyo, and in more rural areas like Wakayama, Shizuoka, and Saitama prefectures.
The killer's ability to operate over such a wide area, what did that suggest to police?
It suggested either a team of people, which seemed unlikely, or one highly mobile, very careful individual who could strike and just vanish, even in a busy city.
And the victims were from all walks of life.
Completely. What the last victims mentioned in the contemporary reports was a 17-year-old high school girl in Saitama. It just underlines that nobody, no age group, no location was safe.
So the criminal used convenience, an easily found weapon, and perfectly mimicked a major marketing campaign. The police had an impossible task ahead of them. So with the death toll rising and the attacks spread out all over the country, the police investigation, it must have been facing just enormous challenges.
Well, the biggest problem was the complete lack of a traditional pattern.
What do you mean by that?
Police investigations rely on finding connections, a motive, a consistent victim type, a tight geographic area. Here, there was none of that.
The victims were totally random.
Completely. Young, old, men, women, different jobs, different social classes, no link between them whatsoever.
Yeah.
So police couldn't establish a motive like revenge or a targeted hit.
And they couldn't predict where the killer would strike next.
Not with any real accuracy, it just seemed random, pathological, not driven by any external goal.
But what about physical evidence? Surely, with so many crime scenes, there must have been something left behind. A fingerprint, a fiber.
This is one of the most frustrating parts of the case when you read the files. The culprit was incredibly careful.
Meticulous.
Incredibly. They were never caught on security cameras, which were much less common in 1985, of course. And the analysis of the bottles themselves showed basically nothing.
Nothing at all.
No clear fingerprints, no fibers, no trace evidence linking them back to a person or a place. The police had dozens of crime scenes, but zero leads pointing to a suspect.
And they confirmed there was no extortion involved.
That's right. Both Otsuka Pharmaceutical, who make Vitamin C, and Coca-Cola Japan confirmed it. They received no threats, no demands for money, nothing.
So that ruled out a financial motive completely.
It did. And it forced everyone to look at deeper psychological or societal reasons for the crimes.
So with the investigation going nowhere, the priority had to shift to public safety. The National Police Agency launched a huge campaign on September 27th. What did that look like?
It was an all-out effort. The first thing was just mass communication. They distributed leaflets everywhere, especially in big cities like Tokyo, with explicit warnings.
And they put posters on the vending machines themselves.
On a huge number of them, yes.
Yeah.
On many of the nation's 5.2 million machines.
What was the specific advice they gave to people? How were they supposed to protect themselves?
The advice was very practical, very direct. They told people to be hyper-aware, inspect the dispensing slot on the machine, treat any can or bottle found outside the machine as suspicious.
And to check the caps.
Yes, physically check the caps for any signs of tampering or being resealed.
And what about the killer's main tactic, the free drink?
They addressed that head on. The police warnings told people, in very plain language, to throw away any free or promotional drink they found near a machine.
So they were trying to dismantle the killer's psychological weapon.
Exactly. Take away that element of temptation and trust.
And they also went after the source of the poison?
They did. Vending machine operators were told to check their stock constantly. But the bigger move was targeting the stores selling the chemicals. They were told to clamp down on suspicious buyers.
And to start keeping records.
Yes, to keep precise, accurate records of who was buying these dangerous substances.
Huh.
It was a direct attempt to close the loophole that allowed this to happen in the first place.
But in the middle of all this, there was a pretty controversial statement from someone in the beverage industry.
Yes, it really highlighted the tension at the time. A spokesman for the Japanese Soft Drink Bottlers Association, a man named Takeo Mizuchi, made a statement that was seen as, well, as blaming the victims.
What did he say?
He said, and this is a quote, that if only consumers were more cautious, they would have seen that some tampering had been done.
Hey, He was suggesting that people should have been able to spot that a drink was poisoned just by looking at it?
That's how it was widely interpreted, yes.
Yeah.
It seemed to completely minimize the killer's skill and the danger.
It created a huge backlash, I imagine.
It did. It sounded like the industry was shirking responsibility. But, to be fair, at the same time, the industry as a whole was taking major action.
Okay, so what were they doing on a practical level?
Well, the same association Zucchi worked for issued 1.3 million warning stickers that were put on machines right away. And the Manufacturers Association ran huge warning ads in the national newspapers.
And they started looking at upgrading the machines themselves.
Exactly. They knew trust was broken. So they started researching physical security changes. One of the main ideas was to install little lamps on the dispensers that would light up if the slot was tampered with.
A physical sign that something was wrong.
Right. An attempt to build a safeguard right into the machine, to try to restore some of that lost confidence.
So with the police investigation stalled, experts at the time started looking at the crimes through a different lens, sociology, psychology.
Yes, because with no extortion, no communication, the motive had to be internal. They started looking at the cultural pressures in Japan at that time that might lead to something like this.
And the sources point to two main theories from prominent experts of that era.
Right. Two compelling, though of course speculative, theories.
Let's start with the stress outlet theory. This came from Hiroaki Iwa, a professor of criminal sociology in Tokyo. What was his idea?
Professor Iwa's theory was that these murders were a direct symptom of Japan's society in the 1980s.
Which was incredibly intense and work-focused.
Extremely. He suggested the killer was likely someone who was just buckling under immense societal pressure, and this anonymous violence was their way of, well, releasing it, a catastrophic release valve.
We should probably give a little context on why 1980s Japan was so high pressure.
It's essential. That was the peak of Japan's post-war economic boom. You had this dominant corporate culture, the salaryman culture.
Right.
It demanded total loyalty, incredibly long work hours, a lot of unpaid overtime, and just profound conformity. Personal expression was often pushed aside for the good of the group.
So this lack of any outlet for frustration could boil over into this?
That was Iwao's argument. He said, it's not uncommon for Japanese who live under tremendous pressure to let out their frustrations by hurting someone else. The system didn't give you a way to complain or challenge things.
So the frustration just builds.
It builds until it explodes in this indiscriminate way against the public who kind of represent that rigid system. The victims weren't the real target. The act of violating the system's trust was the point.
That's a powerful idea. But there was another theory from a mental health specialist named Susumu Oda. He called it the adrenaline theory. How is that different?
Oda's focus was less on the society and more on the individual's mind, on the pathology. He saw the crimes as being motivated by the psychological reward the killer got from the act itself.
What kind of reward?
Oda thought the killer was driven by adrenaline rushes and this pathological sense of superiority. The thrill came from the planning, from placing the poison successfully, and then watching the news reports.
So the killer is sitting at home, watching the panic they've created.
Exactly. Knowing they hold the power of life and death over complete strangers, and they are totally invisible, completely undetectable.
So for Oda, it wasn't about releasing pressure. It was about a power trip, a sustained feeling of control.
Absolutely. Anonymity was the key to that feeling. The lack of demands just reinforced it. The motive was purely internal. The killer needed that psychological high they got from terrorizing people.
It's important to connect these crimes to what was happening elsewhere in the world. They didn't happen in a vacuum.
No, they fit into a disturbing global pattern at the time. The most famous comparison in the West, of course, is the Chicago Tylenol murders of 1982.
Where cyanide was put into capsules.
Right, and it completely changed how pharmaceuticals are packaged. It showed how vulnerable everyday products were.
And Japan itself was already dealing with another huge product tampering case.
Yes, the public was already on high alert because of the Glico Morinaga case. This involved a criminal group that called itself the Monster with 21 Faces.
That started in 1984.
Correct. And it involved very public threats and blackmail against big candy companies.
So how did that case differ from the Paraquat murders? The Glico Morinaga case was about extortion, right?
The contrast is really important for understanding the escalation of terror. Glico Morinaga was about corporate sabotage and money. The criminals targeted the companies. It was scary, but it was focused.
The Paraquat murders were different.
They were a terrifying escalation. They were lethal, indiscriminate attacks on ordinary people with no demands. It shifted the fear from a company's products being held for ransom to public space itself being weaponized. It signaled that a deadly threat could come from just grabbing a drink from a machine.
Looking back at the aftermath of the Paraquat murders, it seems like even determining the final death toll was complicated.
It was. The numbers you see in the source material usually range from 10 to 13 people killed.
Why is it so hard to get a precise number?
The difficulty was in definitively tying every single death, especially ones that happened later in the spree, to the original killer.
You mean there might have been copycats?
Experts at the time thought that was a real possibility, that the final count might include deaths from copycat killers who were imitating the method, or even, tragically, people who chose to use paraquat for self-poisoning in a way that mimicked the murders.
That idea of social contagion it's frightening.
It is. It just shows how deep the societal impact was. But looking at the legal side of things, even after all this time, the killer could still be brought to justice.
And why is that? In Japan.
It's because of a major change in the law. For a long time, murder cases in Japan had a statute of limitations, but in 2010, they abolished it, specifically for the crime of murder.
So the case is technically still open?
Perpetually open. It means that if the person responsible was identified today, they could still be prosecuted.
Beyond the legal aspect, the most immediate change was to the chemical itself. Regulators finally stepped in.
Yes, this was the long-term, necessary fix. In 1986, they mandated fundamental changes to the chemical formula for paraquat and dequat.
And this was about making it harder to use as a poison.
It's exactly. Less about controlling access and more about making it less palatable and less effective for murder or self-harm.
What were the specific changes they made?
There were 3 key agents they added. First, a strong emetic. That's a compound designed to make you vomit violently almost as soon as you swallow it.
To give the victim a chance to expel the poison.
A chance, yes. Second, they added a foul-smelling agent to give it this powerful warning odor. And third, they added a strong blue dye.
So if someone tried to pour it into a clear drink,
it would immediately turn the liquid bright blue, making it obvious it had been contaminated.
So it smells terrible, makes you vomit, and it's blue. That sounds pretty comprehensive. Did it work?
It certainly made it much, much harder to use as a secret weapon for murder. But it couldn't remove the chemical's core toxicity.
So the danger was still there.
The data shows it was. Even by 2002, almost 20 years later, paraquat was still involved in 40% of all pesticide poisoning deaths in Japan. It just highlights how hard it is to control these inherently dangerous substances.
And finally, the method the killer used, exploiting vending machines. That left a scar. It inspired other incidents later on.
It did. That methodology was influential in a terrible way. Right away, in December of 1985, there was a potential copycat crime with tainted milk cartons served to kids in a school in Mie Prefecture.
And then the idea resurfaced years later.
It did. In 1998, Japan had another wave of drink poisonings. This time it was both vending machines and convenience stores. The poison was different, but the tactic contaminating drinks and leaving them for random victims was the same. It brought all that paranoia from 1985 rushing back.
And there's even a much more recent case.
Yes. The documents mention a 2019 incident in Akita Prefecture. It was a canned beer in a vending machine that had a tiny hole drilled in the bottom and was poisoned with paraquat.
So even today?
Even today. That isolated case shows that the vending machine is still a psychological target for these kinds of anonymous attacks. It just demonstrates the long shadow that the 1985 murders cast over Japan's safety culture.
It seems the lesson is that when you break trust in public infrastructure, it's very, very hard to ever fully get it back.
So we've completed our review of the materials on the 1985 Paraquat murders. It's a truly tragic case, defined by an anonymous killer who managed to successfully weaponize consumer trust.
This killer used a unique and, frankly, horrifying method. They exploited a simple marketing promotion and the huge network of public vending machines to carry out these lethal, indiscriminate attacks. It terrified a country and forced real change in regulation.
And the case's enduring mystery comes from that total lack of evidence, that lack of a clear motive. It forced experts to look into these deep sociological and psychological theories to even begin to understand where such random cruelty could come from.
And that really brings us to a final thought, building on those theories we talked about. The experts back then saw these murders as a release of pressure from a very rigid, conformist society. If you think about the unique pressures of our modern world, economic inequality, digital surveillance, political polarization, the need for some kind of anonymous, high-impact outlet might still be there.
So the question to consider is this. What analogous platforms, What modern consumer systems that are built on trust might an anonymous person exploit today to carry out the same kind of indiscriminate malice? The target changes, but perhaps that underlying societal tension never really goes away.
It is a profound challenge to think about how we maintain safety and trust in an ever more complex world. Thank you for joining us for this extensive analysis of the source material.
Thanks for listening.